Welcome to Talmudic Treasures. Today we're learning Sotah, page 5, which again teaches us that God does not like an individual who is haughty, someone who is arrogant and constantly trying to show off. In fact, he says in the Talmud that when it comes to God choosing the proper location for the Torah to be given, it was given on a small mountain. And it was done deliberately to teach us this notion that even though he could have chosen a much larger mountain, in which could have been as tall as 32,000 cubits, which is quite high, it instead chose a much smaller mountain, Mount Sinai, which is 500 cubits. And in addition to that, when God spoke to Moshe, we find that he could have chosen also a very lofty tree to have spoken from. But instead, he chose a low, humble thorn bush, which again teaches this notion that even though God himself is obviously exalted and great, unlike movie stars and celebrities and multi-billionaires, in which they only want to associate with those who are in their, so to speak, league, when it comes to God, he actually finds comfort being among those who are in a lower spirit, those who are more humble in spirit. In fact, it says here as well that someone who is haughty, because they feel like they take up the entirety of the world, therefore God says, I can't even be in the same world as them. And because of this, the Talmud tells us how important it is for us to be able to display levels of humility. Now, how much humility? Should we be completely humble, like comparable to the dirt or the ashes of the ground? On this, the Talmud interestingly chooses that you are allowed to have some element of haughtiness, an eighth of an eighth. And that's it. Or I guess translating that into a fraction to 1/64. Now the reason why the Talmud says this is because Mount Sinai, as I said, actually had this ratio. It was 500 cubits, and the tallest mountain was 32,000. Because one could ask the question, if it's true that God's trying to teach that a person who is capable of receiving the Torah needs to be humble, and therefore that's why he chose Mount Sinai, this small mountain, then he should have given the Torah on the ground itself, on the very earth. The fact is that God recognizes that sometimes we do need to speak up. And if we are completely humble to the point that we are like the earth, then people are not going to acknowledge us. If we are going to be successful in teaching Torah, in giving people proper rebuke, they're not going to listen to you if you are completely humble totally. And therefore you need to at least have, just like Mount Sinai, a little bit, an eighth of an eighth, which again is obviously a very insignificant small amount. But what the Talmud here is emphasizing is that if you're a person that has any chance of growth, you cannot feel haughty, because if you feel haughty, then you're not going to be capable of ever being able to learn from anyone or anything, because you think you know it all. And then the Talmud says one other and unbelievable statement. It says that even you have this person who is called a gasus ruach, which comes from the word wind, like you blow up a balloon, it looks large, but the truth is it's really empty inside. That person, all you need is the tiniest little gust of wind, and it could push that person all the way to the other side, because they really don't have anything of real substance within them. A person that needs to constantly toot their own horn is showing that they need self-affirmation. They need recognition from others because they themselves don't feel adequate. And therefore, a person who is truly grounded and is able to receive the Torah is someone who is humble.